I spent nearly 3 decades being the family's shadow. Then my grandmother handed me everything. And suddenly, they remembered how to beg. I learned early that my face simply didn't register on the family scanner. At every holiday, my cousins got the applause for small things. A barista promotion, a new SUV, a single new certificate hanging on a wall, and my successes were invisible by default. When they talked, their eyes bounced from one trophy story to the next, like they were speed reading a catalog. I would stand there holding a Hostess bottle of wine I'd spent too much on because expensive gifts made people less likely to dismiss you out of hand. And still someone would describe me in the third person, as if their words were a private broadcast. "You're that kid who flunked out of law school, right?" Aunt Marilyn would say in that condescending tone, stepping around me to hug anyone else who came through the door. My own father would explain me in the polite euphemism of relatives who don't know what to say. Devin's exploring some tech stuff. The wording was always small and careful. The kind of phrasing you use when you want people to assume you mean nothing. I didn't fit their hierarchy. I hadn't become a doctor or a banker. I dropped out of law school to start a company, CloudSync Solutions, because I fell in love with building useful things. 7 years later, CloudSync pulled in healthy revenue, employed 15 people, supported a team of brilliant, overworked engineers who answered to me. I finished a master's degree in computer science while running the company and kept a 4.0 GPA through nights that blurred into code and conference calls. When I posted the graduation photo to the family chat, the message thread went dead for 3 days. Meanwhile, my cousin Liam got promoted to assistant manager at a coffee shop, and the thread erupted like it had found religion. Congratulations. Group gifts, the works. The social math of our family was simple. If your resume had a white-collar label, they respected it. If it didn't, your achievements were merely eccentric. So I kept showing up. Some small, stubborn part of me hoped that persistence would win them over, or that time might reveal how wrong they'd been. Mostly, though. I came because my grandmother Dorothy had been the one person who treated me like a person rather than a punchline. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m., I would drive to Sunset Manor carrying a small cooler with her favorite, homemade chocolate chip cookies. She taught me that recipe when I was 12. In her upright kitchen with sun on the linoleum and a laugh that made her eyes fold like paper. The nurses knew me there. The staff greeted me with warmth I'd never been offered at family parties. For 6 years, I listened to her stories, played chess with hands that remembered building a life, and felt like I belonged somewhere. She asked me questions that were precise and curious. When I explained server architecture or client acquisition strategies, her face lit up the way it does when something finally makes sense. She loved the idea of building something from nothing because she'd done it.
Herself.
Long before it was respectable, my family treated Dorothy like a project or a line item. Marilyn visited twice in 5 years, both times to check the will. Greg sent flowers once a year and called when he needed signatures. When Dorothy's health declined, I was at her side. When she died, I learned of it via a blunt group text from my mother. "Mom passed this afternoon. Funeral, TBD." No call, no conversation, just the sort of administrative bulletin you send about a canceled subscription. I felt the same dull ache I'd always felt. That I was peripheral to their lives until money rearranged the lines. The will reading took place in a mahogany office, where air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The relatives arrived like they had sniffed prey on the air, practiced grief. Dramatic handkerchiefs, portfolios filled with imagined futures. They sat like a jury, prepared to carve everything into equal pieces. The estate was considerable. A Victorian mansion, diversified portfolios.
Ow!
In a family construction company that quietly, Dorothy had grown from a pickup truck into a regional brand worth millions. We'd all assumed the usual division. Everyone would get something. They had already mentally divided the spoils. Attorney Morrison read the standard preamble, and then, with the precise cruelty of someone who knows exactly how to make a room listen, started delivering Dorothy's choices. She left Veronica what she had given her in her final years, a line so thin it read like a rebuke. She left Greg disappointment and best wishes. She left the grandchildren the attention they had shown her, none whatsoever. The attorney quoted, and the room gasped on cue. Then he looked at me. To my grandson Evan, who sat with me every Tuesday, who brought me cookies, who listened and treated me as Dorothy the person rather than Dorothy the family's asset. I leave everything else. The mansion, the portfolios, the business, the ledger that tied them together. He handed me a thick envelope with a note in Dorothy's looping script. You were the only one who saw me. Be ready. They will come. My hands shook so hard I could hardly hold the paper. The family reaction worsened quickly. Shock curdled into outrage. Marilyn's whispering turned into cries of scandal. Greg's face reddened into a practiced fury. Contest the will, he demanded, bitter that the expected windfall had been denied. They sounded like characters reading from a rehearsed script. Accusations of incompetence, claims of undue influence, cries of elder abuse, as though Dorothy herself weren't capable of clear decisions. But Dorothy had been methodical. She'd documented competency checks, prepared recordings of conversations, and left clear instructions with Attorney Morrison. She'd recorded the stories I'd shared with her, our chess nights, notes of dates and visits. The attorney had every medical and legal evaluation ready. Any attempt to contest, he said calmly, would trigger release of records Dorothy kept, records that hinted at unpaid loans, mismanaged business deals, and small frauds buried in family bookkeeping. The room's fury turned to a nervous hush. People who'd been willing to gamble on her death suddenly preferred the quiet of plausible deniability. I left the office with keys, documents, and a very complicated inheritance. My phone lit up within minutes. Marilyn, we need to talk tonight. Family dinner. Greg, let's have coffee. Theo, drinks. I wasn't concerned. It was the arrival of vultures who suddenly had appointments on their calendars. I almost didn't go to Marilyn's dinner. I considered hiding at home, cataloging investments, and figuring out how to run a construction company I'd always treated as an artifact. But there was a small, stubborn part of me that wanted to stare into the faces that had dismissed me for 28 years and watch what desperation did to them. When I arrived at Greg's house that night, they all turned their heads in unison, a theatrical synchronization I'd never been part of before. Suddenly, I had the seat of honor, the head chair no one had ever offered me for any holiday. Marilyn practically lunged with perfume and faux sincerity. Evan, we're so proud. It was all so performative that it felt like watching a badly written play. Yet the performance had purpose. Plans about trusts and shared responsibility unfurled like a press release. They wanted a family trust, precisely the mechanism to redistribute what Dorothy had given me back into the original hands that expected it. I listened while they rehearsed kindness and fiduciary concern. The pivot was subtle. Worry about my inexperience running an estate. Worry about me shouldering responsibility alone. Theo suggested a family council. Ava, the cousin, who always scanned Instagram during holiday to see what looked best for her public image, presented a folder with anticipated proposals. The subtext was always the same. How can we get a peace without looking like vultures? I felt a slow heat rise in my chest. Not anger first, but irritation at how quickly they'd swapped absence for authority. I told them Dorothy had left instructions. She anticipated their reaction. I also told them I had recordings. It was an escalation I hadn't planned publicly, but the moment demanded clarity. I played a few snippets. Marilyn's old dismissal about me playing with computers. Greg's thinly veiled suggestion that manual labor might teach me humility. Ava's explanation to friends about why family photos excluded me because of brand risk. Faces paled like paper. A wine glass slipped from Marilyn's fingers and shattered. The veneer cracked, and whatever sympathy they'd rehearsed dissolved into panic. Legal challenges followed, predictable and messy. They accused me of undue influence, of manipulating a wealthy, frail woman into rewriting her will. Their lawyers filed motions. I countered with Dorothy's own voice, 6 years of recorded conversations, where she articulated her reasons clearly and lovingly. The nursing staff testified to my weekly presence. The head nurse explained Dorothy would ask every Monday if I intended to bring cookies that Tuesday. Dorothy had documented not only the affection, but the absence of others. The judge, unimpressed by performative remorse, ruled in favor of the will. The estate was mine. Winning didn't feel like triumph so much as an accounting. The fallout was swift. Marilyn lost her house. She'd mortgaged future expectations on an inheritance that didn't exist. Greg's restaurant collapsed under debts he'd rationalized would be covered by family money. Cousin Cole's engagement fell apart when the fiancé pulled back and accepted someone with steadier assets. The headlines in the local tabloid were merciless. Family dynasty unravels. Their lives engineered with soft confidence and borrowed credit. Toppled like a house of cards without the cushion they'd counted on. My parents tried the old script's tears. Requests to reconcile. Promises of family first now. I gave them $500 as a last symbolic gesture and called it even. The math was clear. I didn't owe them an emotional bailout. Ava appeared months later in a coffee shop, ragged and honest with remorse I'd never expected. She had lost the trappings and found a humility that was almost painful to watch. We talked for 2 hours about envy, complicity, and the cowardice of people who prefer comfort to truth. She asked for nothing but acknowledgement. I gave that. Later, she helped plan small community programs. I funded through a foundation I started in Dorothy's name, the Iris, Dorothy Tech, and training center that offered after-school coding and job training to kids. Reminded me of my younger self. The construction company, which Dorothy had built with dirt and guts, needed leadership. I could have sold it and walked away, but Dorothy had wanted it preserved. I hired professionals, kept local managers, and restructured the business into multiple markets. The mansion became a community center with classrooms and co-working spaces. The plaque above the door reads, Dorothy Patterson Community Center. It's odd to walk past it and remember the Tuesday nights that made all this real. Those cookied evenings were the seed of something better than reconciliation. It became a vehicle for new opportunities for people who didn't have built-in supporters. Not everyone came back. Some people remained estranged, nursing grievances I had no desire to fix. My parents' relationship with me stayed polite and distance remained. It was messy and real and, in the end, exactly what I expected. You can't buy authenticity with a check. You can't force someone to earn your trust because they think they deserve it. They had decades to do it and chose otherwise. I, on the other hand, chose presence. 3 years later, the life I built looks nothing like the family map I grew up with. CloudSync expanded. The nonprofit flourished. The mansion's lawns host job fairs and local theater productions. Children who would have otherwise had no access to mentors now learned to code, build, and dream. The black sheep didn't just sit and brood. He found a flock that mattered. Once, while walking through the community center, a kid asked me why I'd kept the business instead of selling it and walking away. Because someone built it, I told him, and I meant Dorothy. She proved you can start with nothing and make something that helps other people. I couldn't let that die. He looked at me like a question, and I realized the deeper answer. Dorothy taught me to be present. She taught me to act. The rest of my family? They had the chance to come clean, to earn their place, and most chose not to. Forgiveness is complicated. It's not a transaction, and it can't be purchased. It's earned through repeated, consistent presence. If there's a moral in my story, it's this. Being ignored for decades doesn't make you small. Sometimes it gives you time to grow, and when power arrives, it's a terrible test. Do you hoard it? Do you weaponize it? I used it to build. I used it to keep a promise I made to a woman who always asked more about people than portfolios. I made a choice to preserve her legacy beyond the ledger. At my wedding, yes, I married, quietly and joyfully. I invited Ava as my only family member from the old crowd. She stood at my side and spoke without cliché, owning mistakes, naming them, and offering real apologies. Later, when asked whether I'd ever consider forgiveness for the others, I said, forgiveness must be earned, and I will not hoard my mercy for those who never once showed an ounce of it when it mattered. Sometimes, being the black sheep means you get to pick your flock. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the new flock builds something far better than the old herd ever imagined.